The galaxy was in ruins. Across countless star systems, the Xeric had left their mark, a trail of destruction stretching from the inner cores of the galaxy to its furthest, most isolated corners. Their empire was ruthless, unstoppable, and relentless. They enslaved, exterminated, and obliterated everything in their path, with no regard for mercy, no trace of compassion. To the galaxy's inhabitants, the Xeric were a nightmare made real. The Xeric's weapons were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They wielded energy weapons that tore through the heaviest starships as if they were made of paper. Their massive fleets were equipped with technology that bent the laws of physics, making them nigh invincible. No one had dared challenge them. Resistance was crushed before it even began. Planets that stood up to the Xeric disappeared overnight, reduced to ash and forgotten whispers. The galaxy, once a vibrant and diverse expanse of civilizations, had become a landscape of fear. Ancient empires had fallen, and lesser species were left fighting for scraps of freedom. The few free worlds remaining were isolated, scattered like dust in the vastness of space. Among these remnants was Earth, once a thriving and self-sufficient planet. Earth's colonies had been decimated. Only a handful of human settlements remained on the fringe of the galaxy, out of the Xeric's immediate grasp. Humanity's presence was little more than a distant memory, an insignificant blip in the grand sweep of galactic history. The Xeric had wiped out Earth's colonies in brutal raids long ago, and many assumed the human race had been extinguished entirely. To the rest of the galaxy, Earth was a myth, a tale told in hushed tones, a species lost to the void. The galaxy had accepted its fate. Those who remained struggled to survive in the shadow of the Xeric, hoping that somehow someone, anyone, would rise to challenge their might. But it seemed hopeless. The Xeric were everywhere. They controlled everything. No one dared hope for a savior, for a force capable of taking them down. The idea of standing up to the Xeric was a fool's dream, a naive wish spoken by those who didn't understand the true scope of their power. Then, one day, something happened. A signal was intercepted, faint but unmistakable. A transmission unlike any the galaxy had heard before. It was simple, just a voice that carried with it a tone of unshakable confidence, of defiance. The message was brief. "We're coming." At first, no one believed it. The galaxy had grown accustomed to the Xeric's tyranny. A single ship, a single voice, could hardly make a difference. Who could challenge the Xeric now? But the message stirred something deep within the hearts of those who had been oppressed for so long. Could it be? Could there actually be someone, some force, brave enough to face the Xeric head-on? As rumors spread across the galaxy, whispers of hope began to grow louder. The name humanity resurfaced from the dark corners of history, and with it, the galaxy's first spark of defiance. The Xeric had just completed another brutal conquest. The human colony on Vetra IV had been their latest target, a world once teeming with life, now nothing more than a charred wasteland. The Xeric fleet had arrived without warning, their ships descending from the darkness of space like a storm, engulfing the planet in an instant. Within hours, the cityscapes had been reduced to rubble, its inhabitants slaughtered or taken as prisoners. To the Xeric, this was just another victory, just another world added to their ever-expanding empire. They had no reason to expect anything different. Their might was overwhelming, their weapons unstoppable. They were the apex predators of the galaxy, and nothing, no species, no force, had ever been able to stand against them. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have anticipated, was that their conquest of Vetra IV would be the spark that ignited something they never imagined, a threat they couldn't comprehend. In the aftermath of the massacre, a strange signal cut through the galaxy. It was not like the Xeric's usual communications, which were cold, commanding, and authoritative. This was something different, a voice, strong and unyielding. It had no fear, no hesitation. It simply spoke a message that carried across the void to every corner of the galaxy. "We're coming." At first, The Xeric thought it was nothing more than a desperate cry from the remnants of a broken species struggling to survive. It was an anomaly, a glitch in the system. They dismissed it, confident in their superiority, sure that no one could challenge their might. Earth, after all, had been wiped out long ago. Humanity had been scattered to the winds. Who could possibly threaten the Xeric now? But as the message spread, doubt began to creep into their ranks. The name humanity had not been spoken in centuries. The Xeric had crushed their colonies, and yet this message, this lone defiant voice, was unmistakable. It seemed impossible. Could humans, a species they had all but wiped from existence, truly be the ones to challenge them? No one knew the answer, but one thing was certain. The Xeric could not afford to ignore the possibility. They dispatched a fleet, massive in scale, to hunt down the source of the transmission. They would find this human vessel and crush it before it could even become a threat. A single ship, they thought, would pose no challenge. They had obliterated entire worlds. A ship was nothing. The fleet arrived at a remote sector of space, far from Xeric-controlled space. It was a dead zone, devoid of life or significance. Nothing but empty space. And yet there it was. A ship. Small, sleek, unassuming. The Xeric couldn't believe their eyes. There was no way that this was the human threat they had been warned about. But before they could even process the absurdity of the situation, the ship moved. With a speed and agility they had never seen before, the human ship darted across the skies like a shadow, quickly vanishing from view. It didn't flee. It repositioned, its engines humming with an eerie precision. This wasn't some random, desperate last stand. No, this was something calculated. The Xeric fleet advanced. The hunt was on. The Xeric fleet, massive and imposing, continued its pursuit of the lone human warship, still uncertain of what it was they were dealing with. Their ships, equipped with the latest in destructive firepower, advanced through the dark expanse of space like an unstoppable wave. They were confident in their superiority, certain that no single vessel, especially not one as small and seemingly insignificant as this, could stand against their might. But then, the warship made its move. It wasn't like anything the Xeric had ever seen. No human technology had ever been capable of such precision, such agility. And yet here it was. The warship, sleek and black, cut through space like a shadow, moving faster and more efficiently than anything the Xeric had ever encountered. It wasn't running, it was strategizing. It weaved through the fleet with a fluidity that left the Xeric commanders confused and enraged. Every time they thought they had it cornered, it slipped away, reappearing somewhere else, always out of reach. The Xeric fleet had never experienced anything like it. Every time they opened fire, their weapons missed, striking only empty space. The human ship was always one step ahead. And when the warship did strike back, it was devastating. The first strike was a bolt of energy that slammed into the side of one of the Xeric's destroyers. The ship shuddered violently before its shields crumpled under the intensity of the blast, leaving the vessel exposed. The Xeric destroyer, its engines disabled, began to drift helplessly through space. Before it could recover, another blast hit, obliterating it completely. The Xeric fleet was thrown into chaos. For the first time, they realized they weren't fighting some insignificant resistance. This human warship was an advanced weapon, a marvel of technological prowess, and it was wielded with deadly precision. Inside the warship, the crew was a study in calm. Soldiers, engineers, and pilots all worked in harmony, each playing their part in keeping the ship one step ahead of the Xeric. They knew they were outnumbered, but they had something the Xeric didn't: strategy, ingenuity, and determination. This wasn't a battle of raw power. This was a battle of wits. The warship's captain, a seasoned military strategist named Captain Lydia Stone, stood at the command center, eyes fixed on the screen as the battle unfolded. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of every decision pressing down on her. She knew that each strike, each maneuver, was critical. But she also knew one thing for certain: The Xeric had underestimated humanity. "We're not just fighting to survive," she said, her voice steady as she addressed her crew. "We're here to show them that they're not invincible. We're here to remind the galaxy that humanity will never bow to anyone." Her words were met with nods of approval from her crew. They weren't just fighting for their lives. They were fighting for something much bigger, the survival of every free species in the galaxy. The human warship darted again, its engines roaring with precision as it took out another Xeric cruiser. The battle was far from over, but one thing had become crystal clear. Humanity, against all odds, had just become the galaxy's most dangerous force. And the Xeric were beginning to realize it. The battle raged on, and the Xeric fleet continued to struggle against the human warship's uncanny ability to evade their attacks. Each time they thought they had it cornered, the ship slipped away, leaving only a trail of destruction in its wake. It was as if the human ship knew every move they would make before they made it, as though it could read their minds. It was unlike anything the Xeric had ever encountered. Tricon, the Xeric fleet commander, watched the unfolding chaos from his flagship, his sharp mandibles clicking together in frustration. The human warship had now taken out 5 of his largest cruisers, and his fleet was rapidly losing cohesion. How could something so small, so insignificant in their eyes, have such devastating power? He had always prided himself on being a master tactician, but this human ship had thrown all his calculations into disarray. "Bring in the reinforcements," Drakon snarled. "We will not be defeated by a single ship." He activated the command systems, and a dozen more Xeric ships emerged from hyperspace, surrounding the human vessel in an unbreakable ring. This time, they would not let it escape. On board the human warship, Captain Lydia Stone remained as calm and composed as ever. Her eyes never left the tactical display in front of her, her hands moving fluidly over the controls as she continued to weave her ship through the Xeric blockade. She knew the risks. She knew the Xeric would only get more desperate as the battle wore on. But she also knew they were doing more than just surviving. They were changing the tide of the war. "Keep their focus on us," she ordered, her voice unwavering. "We need to buy time for the others to regroup." The warship's crew worked in perfect unison, dodging the Xeric's fire while returning precise strikes. Every shot that hit its mark was a testament to the training and determination of the crew. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to reclaim their place in the galaxy. And then it happened. As the battle reached a fever pitch, a sudden, unexpected transmission broke through the chaos. It was a voice, but this time it wasn't a military command. It wasn't a threat or a demand. It was something completely different. "This is Captain Lydia Stone of the human warship Vanguard. We are the last of humanity, and we refuse to fall. You will not destroy us." The Xeric fleet was stunned. The message was a direct challenge to their authority, a declaration that they were being watched. Draken's eyes narrowed as he processed the significance of the transmission. "You've been hiding all these years, and now you dare challenge us," he growled, his voice a mixture of disbelief and fury. "What makes you think you can stand against the might of the Xeric Empire?" Stone's voice was calm, unshaken by the threats. "Because we've survived. And as long as we breathe, we will fight. We are not like the others you've conquered. We will not fall." For a long moment, there was only silence. The Xeric fleet hovered, uncertain, as though questioning whether this human warship, with its audacity and strength, could really represent the humanity they had thought wiped from the galaxy. And then, Drakon made a decision. "Crush them," he spat. "Leave nothing left." The Xeric fleet surged forward with renewed fury, but something had changed. The war had taken a turn, and humanity had just made its presence known in a way no one would ever forget. The Xeric fleet descended like an unstoppable tide, their ships gleaming in the cold expanse of space, their weapons primed and ready. Their leader, Drakon, had given the order, and the battle was about to escalate to a point no one had expected. The stakes were higher now. This wasn't just about defeating a lone human warship anymore. This was about sending a message to the galaxy. No one could stand against the Xeric. Inside the Vanguard, Captain Lydia Stone's eyes flickered over the tactical display, her mind racing. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, but she didn't let it show. Her crew, however, was a different story. There were nervous glances and whispers, but when Stone spoke, they fell silent, every eye focused on her. "This is it," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We're not just defending ourselves anymore. We're defending every world that's been conquered, every species that's been enslaved. We're defending the hope that there's still a chance to take back our galaxy." Her words carried weight. The crew had seen the destruction the Xeric had left in their wake, the despair that hung over every world they'd taken. They knew what was at stake. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the future of the galaxy itself. The human warship had been designed with one thing in mind: survival. It was a marvel of engineering, a combination of advanced human technology and alien innovations, its systems integrated in ways no one had ever imagined. But it wasn't just the ship's firepower that made it formidable. It was the crew. They were more than soldiers. They were survivors, each one driven by the knowledge that if they failed, the galaxy would fall into the hands of the Xeric. As the Xeric closed in, the Vanguard began to move with a precision that defied logic. It danced through the battle, its engines blazing as it dodged the full force of the Xeric's fire, returning fire with surgical accuracy. The ship's weapons struck like lightning, disabling Xeric ships one by one, the energy blasts lighting up the black void of space. On the bridge, Stone could feel the ship's engines hum beneath her feet as it executed each maneuver flawlessly. It was as though the Vanguard was an extension of her will. She had trained her entire life for this moment, and now she was leading the charge against the most powerful force the galaxy had ever known. The Xeric were relentless, but they were starting to show signs of weakness. Their ships, once impenetrable and unstoppable, were beginning to falter under the Vanguard's sustained assault. For the first time, the Xeric were on the defensive, their ships limping away from the fight, desperate to regroup. "They're retreating," one of the officers called out from the communications console. Stone's eyes narrowed. "They're not retreating. They're reorganizing. Expect a counterattack." But even as she said it, she knew the tide had begun to shift. The Xeric, the unbeatable empire, were struggling. The human warship had broken their sense of invincibility, and with it, the belief that no one could stand against them. The crew of the Vanguard had fought through every obstacle, every setback, and now they were beginning to see the first signs of victory. The galaxy's first true stand against the Xeric had begun, and it was fueled by one thing: the unyielding resolve of humanity. The Xeric fleet was in disarray, their once unassailable ships now vulnerable to the relentless assault of the Vanguard. The atmosphere on the bridge was tense but filled with a sense of cautious optimism. Captain Lydia Stone stood at the forefront, watching as the battle unfolded on the tactical screen, her mind working over every move, every possible outcome. The Xeric were regrouping. It was clear now. They hadn't expected a human warship to push them this far, and they were desperate. But there was a flicker of doubt among their ranks, something even Drakon, their leader, couldn't easily suppress. The Xeric had always considered themselves the pinnacle of galactic warfare, undefeated, unchallenged. But the Vanguard had shattered that illusion. The human ship wasn't just a threat. It was proof that the galaxy wasn't as helpless as the Xeric had assumed. "Captain," a voice broke through her thoughts. Lieutenant Kessler, the communications officer, was standing by the comms console, his brow furrowed. "We've intercepted a new transmission from the Xeric flagship." Stone turned toward him, her expression unwavering. "What's it say?" Kessler hesitated, then relayed the message. "They're asking for a ceasefire. A parley." The words hung in the air like a challenge. The Xeric, the conquerors of countless worlds, were now asking for peace. But Stone knew it wasn't that simple. This wasn't about diplomacy. This was about survival. "Send a reply," she said, her voice firm. "Tell them we're not interested in negotiations. We're here to end this." Kessler nodded, sending the message through the comm system. As the transmission went out, Stone's eyes flicked back to the battlefield. The Xeric were retreating, their forces scattering, but they weren't leaving. They were positioning themselves for something bigger. Stone knew that this wasn't over yet. On the screen, the flagship of the Xeric fleet, the Korak, a massive vessel bristling with weapons, began to pull away from the rest of the fleet, its engines glowing ominously. Stone's heart raced. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The true test. "They're coming in hot," Lieutenant Eris, the tactical officer, reported from his station. "All Xeric ships are converging on our position. It's a full-force attack." Stone didn't flinch. Her crew was ready, and they would stand firm. "All hands, brace for impact. We're not running. This is the fight we've been preparing for." The Vanguard moved into position, taking up a defensive stance, its weapons primed and ready. The Xeric fleet surged forward, their coordinated assault overwhelming in its sheer size. But the Vanguard wasn't intimidated. It was a predator of a different kind, smaller, faster, and more lethal than anything the Xeric had faced. Energy beams flashed across the dark void as the two forces collided. The Vanguard weaved through the onslaught, dodging laser fire and returning blasts with pinpoint accuracy. Every shot from the Xeric was met with a counterstrike, each one designed to disable rather than destroy. Stone's strategy was simple: weaken them, break their resolve, and make them feel the weight of their overconfidence. As the battle continued, the Xeric flagship, Korak, loomed closer. Its enormous weapons began charging up, preparing to unleash a devastating energy blast capable of obliterating the Vanguard. But Stone had a plan of her own. "Prepare the pulse cannon," she ordered. "We're going for the flagship." The human warship adjusted its trajectory, moving directly into the heart of the Xeric fleet. The tension on the bridge was palpable as everyone took their stations, knowing that what came next would determine the fate of the galaxy. The battle had reached its peak. The Xeric flagship, Korak, towered in the distance, its weapons charging with the raw energy of impending destruction. The Vanguard had maneuvered itself into the heart of the Xeric fleet, and every human on board knew that the next moments would determine the outcome of this war. Captain Lydia Stone stood unwavering, her eyes fixed on the massive enemy vessel. The Korak was unlike anything they had faced before. Its sheer size and firepower were a testament to the Xeric Empire's dominance. But the Vanguard had a weapon the Xeric didn't account for: a crew bound by unbreakable resolve, guided by a commander who would never surrender. "We can't outrun that blast," Lieutenant Eris called out, his voice tense. "If it fires, we're done." Stone's gaze remained locked on the screen. There was no retreat, no second chances. This was the moment where history would be made. She turned to her crew, her expression hardening. "We've been fighting for this." The Korak drifted silently, its once mighty form now crippled and lifeless in the void. The Xeric fleet, once an unstoppable force, was splintering apart before the might of the Vanguard and its human crew. Their largest and most powerful ship was no longer a threat, and with it, the backbone of the Xeric military had shattered. On the bridge of the Vanguard, Captain Lydia Stone stood tall, her hands gripping the command console. The battle was far from over, but the Xeric had lost their edge. Their coordination was crumbling, their ships scattered in disarray, and for the first time since the war had begun, they were retreating, not in an organized fashion, but in complete panic. The warship's systems were still running at full capacity, and the crew was pushing themselves to the limits. The sound of laser fire and the hum of the engines filled the air. But Stone's mind was focused solely on one thing: ending this war. "Captain, we've got multiple Xeric ships attempting to disengage," Lieutenant Kessler reported from his station, his voice strained but filled with determination. "They're trying to make a break for it, but they're disorganized. They don't have the leadership they need to escape. Stone nodded, her gaze hardening. They're not going anywhere. She turned to Eris, the tactical officer. Target their engines. We can't let them regroup. We finish this now. The Vanguard surged forward, cutting through the remnants of the Xeric fleet with brutal efficiency. The Xeric ships, despite their size and strength, were no match for the relentless precision of the human warship. The Vanguard moved with an elegance that defied its size, darting between enemy vessels, picking off Xeric ships one by one. Outside the ship, the stars glittered like distant beacons, and the blackness of space seemed to swallow everything in its path. The clash of metal and the hum of energy weapons echoed in the vacuum, a testament to the ferocity of the battle. But even as the Vanguard tore through the enemy forces, Stone knew they were running out of time. They couldn't keep fighting forever. Every shot they fired brought them closer to the end of the conflict, but also closer to the edge of exhaustion. "We've got incoming," Eris shouted, his eyes wide as several Xeric ships broke away from the main fleet and made a suicidal dash toward the Vanguard. "Steady," Stone commanded, her voice calm despite the urgency. "Brace for impact. Get ready to return fire." The Vanguard shields flared as the Xeric ships closed in, their weapons lighting up the dark expanse. Stone's grip tightened on the console as the energy blasts tore through the air, narrowly missing their target. The Vanguard dodged, twisting and turning with unnatural precision as the crew fired back with deadly force. One by one, the remaining Xeric ships were taken down. The last of their fleet scattered, unable to mount any further resistance. The Vanguard had done the impossible. They had broken the Xeric. As the final ship fell silent, the bridge erupted in cheers. The crew was exhausted, battered, but victorious. They had fought for their lives, their future, and the future of every species in the galaxy. Captain Stone stood, taking in the view of the devastated battlefield. The Vanguard was the last symbol of humanity's strength. Against all odds, humanity had survived, and the Xeric Empire was no more. The galaxy was free. "We did it," Stone whispered to herself. "We really did it." And in that moment, it was clear. Humanity had not just survived the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. They had overcome it, and the universe would never forget the day a single human warship entered orbit.